evening, everyone. Welcome to Coffee with Keith, fourth week. I think by now you know which one is coffee. I'm the headmaster of the newest TASIS campus, TASIS Portugal. Are we having technical difficulties? No? Okay. Thank you for joining us again. If you're joining us for the fourth consecutive week, we want to congratulate you and we want to thank you. We have €100 gift certificates for all of you who are joining us for the fourth consecutive week. No proof required, and it's for a restaurant of your choice, anywhere in Portugal, in fact. The only catch is it must be used this week, and takeaway is not allowed. So please let us know. I want to say that I'm feeling a little weary this week. I don't know if anybody else is feeling that. Maybe it is the weather, I'm not sure. Maybe it's from lugging all this hair around. But anyway, we're going to make it through tonight, and we've got a long weekend to look forward to in just 8 days. I want to start with a fun anecdote tonight. There's a young woman in our viewing audience who's been participating in Coffee with Keith. She's a friend of the school, and her name is Julia. And Julia is 6 years old. And her mother told us that this week they decided to play a game at home because, of course, we're all trapped indoors. And Julia suggested that they would play school, which is probably an indication that kids have been away from school too long when they want to play school as a distraction. Anyway, Julia announced that at her school, she would be hosting her own series called Coffee with Julia for her family during the crisis. So I thought that was quite cute. And perhaps a bit outrageous that her mother is giving her coffee at age 6 and at night. We're going to move into the question and answer part of the evening, but I want to say something first to all of our viewers. As I said earlier in the week, or I should say earlier in the series, if you don't fill in the void with fact, sometimes rumor can get out of control. So I want to address a rumor that we've heard in the community, and I want to make sure that everybody understands that it is purely a rumor. We have been accused of stealing the best teachers in Portugal for our new school. And I want to assure everybody that that is only partly true. We haven't been stealing anybody, but we have attracted the finest teachers around. And we've done that because they see that we are a transparent and honest organization, and they're excited to be part of something new. And so I want to make sure that everybody understands our protocols. We do not ever contact teachers at other schools. We have a strict ethical policy. Teachers must contact us if they're interested in working at TASIS, and only after they've completed an application on our website will we contact them. So we expect you to hold us to a high standard. We hold ourselves to a very high ethical and moral standard, and we want to ensure that people understand we will always be held to account, and we will always be responsible for the decisions we make, and we also expect our families and our students to share that sentiment, and that's I think part of the reason we're here. All right, enough of that. Let's move on to something more interesting. I'm going to introduce our two guests tonight, and they're wonderful guests. I think last week you had the pleasure of meeting our grade 1 teachers, Erin Searles and Heather Brooks. They were very impressive, I thought. I'm sure you shared that. We had many families write us and tell us that they were very impressed with both of them and really excited to have their children entering grade 1 next year with these two friendly, collegial, very nice and kind, but also exceedingly professional and talented people. So we're very proud of our teachers tonight. We have two teachers who will be teaching in our grade 4 through 7 program. In fact, John and Isabella are two of my earliest hires at TASIS. They both impressed me for different reasons. Isabella is a young, energetic teacher, currently completing her master's degree in mathematics and science education at McGill University in Canada, where she has also served as a research and teaching assistant. Isabella cut her teeth at the Field School in Washington, D.C., and then over the last 6 summers at TASIS Switzerland, where she's been a counselor and then dean of students in their summer program. We're really excited about having Isabella join us, and I know she's excited about moving to Portugal. John Iglar, on the other hand, is one of our most experienced educators and brings a lot to the table, including deep international experience. A self-proclaimed tech geek, John loves computers, experiential learning, computational thinking, science, robotics, and coding. John has taught computer science classes to all ages, from kindergarten to adult levels, including at the IB level, as well as app and web development. John has also taught mathematics from elementary to high school. He's taught in the US, Indonesia, multiple schools in Africa for more than a decade. John is our most experienced international school faculty member, and he's managed to do all of that while just 29 years old. Incidentally, John's entire family will be joining us at TASIS. His wife, Helen, will teach chess and art, and their daughter, who happens to be a high-level tennis player, will be assisting with our tennis program. So now, the moment you've all been waiting for, let's get to those burning questions from our viewing audience. Okay, the first question is for Isabella. I have to cue our conductor so she can get Isabella on the screen. Okay, she's done that. Good. Thank you, Andrea. Isabella, why, of all the countries in the world, did you pick my beloved Canada to do graduate work in? And is it true you were just leaving America to go away from President Trump? That's not the question. Just stick with the first part.
Okay, well, I absolutely love Canada. I'm currently in Montreal in Quebec. And I came here about 5 years ago to complete my teaching internship at a private school in the English-speaking part of Montreal. And in those 6 months that I was here, I just fell in love with the city. I fell in love with the culture. I liked that there was this touch of French, but also the English side. So it felt very multicultural, also a bit European. And it's always been my dream to live in Europe. So all of that combined brought me back here 2 years ago to start my master's. And while I am very sad to leave, I am extremely excited to discover Portugal, a new country, and finally begin my dream of living in Europe. But I love Canada. Canada is a great, great country.
We all love Canada. Thank you, Isabella. And I actually taught in Montreal, as you know, just down the road from where you did your internship. Great city, albeit very cold in the winter. In fact, very cold even in the spring. What's the temperature there today?
Today, it's approximately 30 degrees Fahrenheit, so 0 degrees Celsius, around there. Pretty cold. It's sunny, though.
Spring in Quebec.
That's all you can ask for.
Thank you, Isabella. Next question is for John. John Iglar, what brought you to Portugal some years ago?
Well, we've been here for a year and a half now, but we've been coming to Portugal for many, many years. Actually, we had good friends who we knew who had lived here before and told us about Portugal, and we came to visit and fell in love with the place. So we've been here, visited many, many times here in Lisbon, as well as all the way up north to Porto and down to the Algarve and all places in between. We love it. We're very happy to be here. And when we decided to leave Ethiopia, we said, where should we go? And we said, let's go to Portugal and make it our home. We bought a house, and here we are.
There may be some questions about your time in Ethiopia and in Africa, because I know you were in a few countries in Africa, John. However, I'm going to go to the next question, which is for you. Can you talk a bit about your, I know you're a tech geek. You say that quite proudly, and we like that in our tech teaching, of course. But you also do some programming, I believe, and you program in a few languages, do you not?
Well, I'm not I'm not a professional programmer, but I have experience in it, and more from an educational point of view. I actually started working in BASIC and actually was employed as a programmer for a short time there. And otherwise I've worked in Python and Java, but I really enjoy working with Scratch and other educational languages. LiveCode's another one I've developed web apps with as well too. So I've had a bunch of experience with a number of things, but not to the level that I would be employed as a professional programmer and make millions and millions of dollars. I'd rather be a teacher and teach kids to do that.
Absolutely. I started programming in Fortran, which is an engineering programming language, on punch card. But that was before you were born, John.
I remember some of the punch cards. I didn't actually use those, but I did program on a mainframe back in the day.
They were much more cumbersome than a USB. All right, we're going to move on to Isabella. Isabella, you're a woman in science. In my day, when I was an engineering major, as you probably know, and there were very few women in science back then. Now, there are more women in medical school, at least in North America, than there are men. What do you attribute that change to, and what turned you on to science?
All right, so for the first part of your question, more women in science, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's actually a question that I've discussed a lot in my classes this past year. I think it's interesting to look at the difference between women in biological sciences and then women in more of the hard sciences like physics or engineering. What we've discussed and what we see, at least from what I've learned this year, is that it seems like there are a lot more women in the biological sciences. And I think part of that is because women feel they can kind of connect to those sciences more and can provide a service to others, like caring for others in nursing or in medicine. But we do still see that in engineering and physics, we still see that it's still quite male dominated. And so as a female science teacher, I'm really excited to show my students and kind of be that model for my students that sciences aren't only for men, and we want to keep increasing the number of women in science. It doesn't matter what science, women can do all sciences, and they just have to want to, and they have to find that passion for sciences, kind of like I did when I was a student. So then what drew me to science, I guess, is your next question. Since I was young, I have always loved science. As a kid growing up, my family was really, really into the outdoors. So we were always hiking, we were biking, we were exploring. My mom would give us a bucket and go have us play in the dirt, right? So always exploring like that. And surfing. And then I grew up in San Francisco, so there were always little earthquakes. And so I always had these questions of, why are these things happening? Why do I see these certain landforms? Or I don't know, why is there a tsunami risk when an earthquake happens? Things like that. So in my science classes growing up, my teachers really took advantage of our surroundings. So whether it was through outdoor education or even just using the backyard of the school to go explore in the creek or go out in the woods and do a little exploration like that, they really took advantage of what we had and got us to really act as scientists, I believe, in exploring and questioning and figuring out what's going on and, you know, starting to answer those questions that I had as a child. So when I went to university, I still had that passion and that interest, and environmental geoscience is what I majored in, because I felt like I got that biological side in it but as well as like the geology and the environmental side that I was still interested in and still questioning and still wanting to learn more about ever since I was a child. So I think it was a combination of all of that exploration as a kid, but then also my teachers who really brought their passion for science and brought their passion for the outdoors. My chemistry teacher in high school, she is an avid lover of the ocean, and so she found ways to always bring in the ocean to class in chemistry. And there are tons of connections, but maybe as a student you wouldn't see those connections automatically. So I think those real world connections really helped me develop my passion, and I think there is no better subject to teach than science, because it's so applicable to our daily lives.
Great answer. Thank you, Isabella. Is it true that you're a member of the Flat Earth Society?
Of course.
No? I got that wrong. Okay, let's go to John. John, why is it important for students to learn programming?
Well, actually, let me go off that question for a moment there, because I wanted to return to something Isabella said. I think one of the things that's great having her there to teach science is as an example for the girls to follow science. I've always really tried to encourage girls to get into engineering and robotics and programming, and you know, it's wonderful having a role model. And Isabel and I, it's been great when we talked about getting materials and some of the engineering stuff that she's going to get for the school. I'm looking forward to having her as a kind of a cheerleader and a guide and a mentor for some of the girls, the younger girls, to get them involved, and hopefully some of them will get into robotics and programming. I think it's very important to have more women in the hard sciences, in engineering and programming. The important thing about programming is there's a couple of things. The goal of teaching students programming in younger ages is not to make them formal programmers, really. You know, we're not expecting all these kids to get out there and make their lives programming. But I think it's really important for us to understand that programming languages and how to get computers to do things is a skill that's needed in all areas these days. There's a great writer, Douglas Rushkoff's written a book about, it's called Program or Be Programmed, and he said, you know, we learned to read and to write and we became literate. Now we teach students to use technological tools, but they're not reading. When he wrote it, we weren't teaching them how to read and write and create those technological tools. So they became users of the tools rather than creators. It's an important thing for students to know how to build things, how to make this technology do the things they want to do. It's also a very empowering tool for students to have. I always love to see the expressions on kids when they say, look, I made this computer do this thing, and it works, and it's a real exciting time for students.
And we often talk about that, John, you know, the ubiquity of technology in society now. We're all consumers of it, whether we want to be or not. But yeah, it's important to understand how these things are created. And attached to that, some of the danger that can be attached if you created if you don't understand the technology. I had a follow up to that, but so tell me talk about computational thinking. There's a term that we throw around a lot. What does computational thinking mean in education? And what are we trying to do when we teach young people to think in that manner?
Thanks for reminding me, because that's the other thing. It's to a certain extent, it's not so much the programming that's that important. It's the thought process, the idea of how to break down a problem into discrete steps that you can use to solve that problem, or to get a machine to solve the problem for you. That's computational thinking. It's a problem-solving skill. Well, obviously it's vitally important in programming, but in many other areas, engineering, sciences, mathematics, this is a thinking skill that is really important for students to have, and it transfers over really well. So as we teach them programming skills and how to break problems down into discrete steps to organize their thoughts and express them in simple languages for the machines to do, we're also using that in a mathematical way, in a scientific way, and an engineering way. So it has a lot of spillover in other areas.
Thank you, John. And that's well said. You know, part of the design of our academic program here at TASIS is not just to have young people learn new things and learn new skills. It's about developing better thinkers in the process of that. And computational thinking and coding, which happens to complement very well our Singapore math program, for example, are the sorts of courses, programs that we believe enhances learning and actually creates better critical thinkers. We talk about critical thinking all the time. We throw that terminology around a lot, but we rarely unpack it. And how do you create critical thinkers if you don't teach knowledge and if you don't think methodology of thinking? So we're really excited that you're going to be introducing coding here. I know you've worked with young people from ages, I believe, 5 and up, and you've done coding with kindergarten students. You're going to 3. So you're going to begin with our school, and so we're very excited about that. So thanks, John. I'm going to ask Isabella the next question. We are going to open this up to other questions, but we're hoping Some of these are giving you the answers you might be looking for in our viewing audience. So, Isabella, you're completing your master's degree.
Yes.
I'm going to ask about how your thesis is going and when that's going to be submitted, but also talk about maybe just give us a sense of what you're doing in your thesis right now. For the last couple of years, you've been studying in a particular area.
All right. So my thesis is going very well. Hopefully going to submit by the end of this week. I have one paragraph to fix and then I'm done. So I'm really almost there, which feels great. But my thesis topic is fostering student inquisitiveness in secondary science classrooms. And this actually is a really great connection to what John was just talking about with computational thinking and critical thinking and problem solving. The way I got to my topic was this interest I have in something called inquiry-based instruction, which is basically teaching students to ask the right questions that lead to scientific investigations and eventually lead them to learning something new. But inquiry-based instruction is a really big thing, and it can be really daunting for a lot of teachers, and especially for someone like me who has never really used inquiry-based instruction in their classroom. So I kind of wanted to focus on what's the basis of inquiry-based instruction, how do we even start to think about using it in our classrooms as teachers. So after doing lots of research and speaking with different teachers and my advisor, it got to the groundwork, which is getting students to ask questions. So getting students to be curious and inquisitive. And this all connects really well to why I fell in love with science as a child, because I was really curious and I wanted to learn more and I had all these questions. But we see that students are kind of losing that curiosity, especially as they get older and they move up in the grades. They're kind of more interested in, well, what's the right answer? How do I get the A? But they're not interested in the problem solving. They're not interested in what gets me to understand this certain scientific topic. So for my thesis, I was observing 3 secondary science teachers here in Montreal. I spent about a month in each of their classrooms, and I was looking for specific moves that they were making in their classrooms to encourage inquisitiveness in their students. And I had a whole list of things that I found and saw as important, and the literature told me were important as well. And I wanted to see, are teachers doing these things? If they are, what's helping them? If they aren't, what could be, inhibiting them? What are the barriers to doing this? So my thesis was really a case study, and it was just examining what different teachers are doing in different contexts, and teachers who have different requirements. So ministry exams, or just teaching to a curriculum, or do they teach younger grades or older grades? So all of these things seem to play into what strategies teachers used and how they used them differently. So in the process of doing that research, I learned so much. I have pages of notes of things that I want to bring to my classroom next year, ways that I want to encourage my students to be curious, inquisitive, ask those questions that are so important to get students learning more. And so I'm really, really excited. I'm really happy that my thesis allowed me to learn so much, and gave me so much to work with. Will give me so much to work with next year when I start teaching again. I was able to use a little bit of it in my job at McGill. I was a teaching assistant this year, so we really focused on teaching our future elementary science teachers to foster that inquisitiveness in their students. So as a result of modeling these best practices for these future science teachers, I was kind of able to put a lot of the things that I learned into practice. So I'm really excited to continue doing that in the fall.
Excellent. Thank you, Isabella. And you and I have talked a lot about this, that science is by its very nature an inquisitive subject. It's experimental. That's how most scientists operate. They don't read books so much as they do experiments and collect data and then analyze their data. But and we believe, obviously, in the process of inquiry. It's a really important part of learning. We've also talked, however, that you have to balance inquiry with a body of knowledge. It's hard to be a good inquirer if you don't have a body of knowledge from which to base your inquiry, base your questions, make investigations. So I'm anxious and looking very much forward to watching you strike that balance where you build the knowledge and the skills that students need to allow them, at first, I'm sure, through very closely guided inquiry, but then to become great experimental scientists on their own. So thank you. This is great experience for you, I'm sure, and we're delighted that you're doing it. All right, I think we're going to open this up. I have a few more questions for you, John, around robotics. If nobody asks them, I'll ask you later, because I know you're a robotics coach and you're very competitive in your robotics, and you actually won some championships. So you can talk about that at some point if you don't get asked, but I'm sure someone will ask it. Amy is going to curate the questions at this point, and they can be for any of us. We prefer you ask John and or Isabella because they're only with us this evening. However, I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Keith. And Isabella and John, it's really exciting to hear you talk about everything you're going to bring to this community. This first question is for John. So we'll get the camera on John. Thank you. And this is from the father of 2 enrolled students who's writing to us from Germany. And he says, John, welcome. Which tools, e.g. Lego, WeDo, are kids expected to use in your grade 4 classes?
We haven't finalized everything just yet, but with the grade 4, we're hoping to use the Lego Mindstorms equipment to build proper robots and all that. The WeDo is a good tool, and we're looking at using that for some of the younger classes, but we'll transition also over to the Mindstorms equipment for grade 4. And we've actually, and I've been working with Andrea about a whole spectrum to break this out and go a little bit beyond this question of robotics equipment from the very youngest grades down into kindergarten on up through middle school and beyond. And so we're going to be having some different robots designed for the younger kids who won't be engineering things as much, but will be programming robots and then building into the engineering and going into the Mindstorm. So we're looking at Sphero robots, which are easy to program for the younger kids, Cubetto robots, which are even easier and wooden and tactile, and they have a tactile programming system, so rather than a touch screen for the youngest, and Spheros going into WeDos and going into the Lego Mindstorms for the older kids.
Terrific, and you must have some ESP there because this same father also does have an early learning center student coming in. So
there you go.
We want to get both.
We want to get them started early and go all the way on up.
Thank you, John. And I have a question for Isabella. So if we'll get the camera on Isabella, thank you. Isabella, how do you see the distribution between theory and practice when teaching science, e.g. biology?
That's a really good question. I think it's really important when teaching science to appropriately balance theory and practice. I think that often students can become overwhelmed with the theory if they don't see how it really applies in practice. So what I try to do is, if a lesson is extremely theoretical, I always try to add something hands-on or something more practical into that lesson, even if maybe the connection is not directly there, but to get them to see that we can always take something in science and make it more practical. I think that students become a little bit less overwhelmed by the theory when they can just see how it applies in real life.
Terrific. Thank you, Isabella. We'll leave it on you for a minute. We have another father who writes, in my school days, sciences, biology, physics, chemistry, etc., were all taught from a theoretical perspective on a blackboard, not a lab in sight. What are your thoughts on experimenting and practical labs, and will TASIS have science labs for students?
Yes. I think that the best part about science is this hands-on and practical part of it. I think that it's really a disservice to students if we don't use the really practical side of science to teach them science. So yes, we will do labs. We will get outside when we can, if we're allowed to do that. There will always be some sort of hands-on application, whether it's what I did something in my old school. We used graham crackers and frosting and rice cakes to show them the motion of the different plates, so plate tectonics, because my students were having a really hard time grasping that. So even if it seems tricky, I'm going to find a way to make it experiential, because I think that's the best part of science, and that's the best way to learn science.
Thank you, Isabella. And we have a question for John. And John, this is our first student question of the evening from a 7-year-old viewer here who says, I love Lego, Mr. Riegler, and can you help me build the Lego Titanic, smiley face?
I'll certainly be happy to help you try. I have not had experience building a Lego Titanic, but it sounds like a fun project. You're going to need a lot of bricks for that one, though.
And is that something you might tackle more in your after-school club having to do with this? Yeah,
I think that's the sort of engineering and building that we want to do in an after-school robotics club. Hopefully we can even take from the Titanic and go beyond to have it be programmable, and so that they can actually do things in it. But yeah, that kind of engineering, we haven't talked curriculum with Isabella, but I know that sort of hands-on engineering is the sort of thing we want to do in science classes as well, throughout the grades. But definitely after school, we're going to be doing some engineering, some building, and Lego is always part of that.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I'm scrolling through the questions here. Keith, I'm going to give you one here. So we'll get the camera on Keith there. The question is, hello. And when will we know for certain to which grades the school will go?
Well, we try to change that up every week just to keep people guessing. We added grade 7 2 weeks ago tomorrow, based on a request from a group of parents who were hoping to have their eldest children in the same school as your youngest children. I checked with our board to make sure we could do that, and then we looked at physical space to make sure we could accommodate a 7th grade. And so we added that. We will not be adding another grade this year. The school will grow organically, so grade 7s will become grade 8s. But we won't be adding senior grades. We'll be adding more students in our lower school. So our grade 7 class, the entering grade 7 class in September, will be forever our oldest group of students through the school. I wanted to say something else, though, Amy, about Isabella missed part of the question about whether we'll have science labs. And yes, we are. In fact, Isabella and John have both been involved in designing and selecting the equipment and furniture for the science lab. And we're sourcing it through a local company in Portugal. And that will be our elementary science lab. We will also, in phase 2, starting next year, have a middle school science lab, which will be equipped for a more rigorous science program, obviously. And the other thing I wanted to say before I forget, because it connects to John's answer about technology, and it was a very good question from a parent. We have a number of parents who are in the tech industry, and many parents who have connections to technology, manufacturing. We want to be a school that partners with our parents. I've said that many times. So if there's an opportunity for you to assist in our programming, be a guest lecturer, invite students to a manufacturing plant. I know a parent that has a manufacturing plant that employs 3D printers, for example, and those kind of things we would love to be a part of, and we invite parents in. So please feel comfortable, obviously, when fall comes, to connect with teachers and make your expertise known and available to us, because those real life opportunities for our students are very valuable.
Thank you. And Keith, I'll let you decide who should answer this question. Aside from students being very focused on finding the answer as quickly as possible, We often feel that many children these days are not taught how to deal with themselves and their environment when the answer is wrong. What tools do you use to help kids work through that?
Well, I'll say a few things, and then I know John and Isabella will probably want to comment as well. I'm expert at that because I'm wrong so often that it's really helpful for me to be able to pass those skills of accepting you're wrong to young people. Seriously, the Singapore math program, for example, is a pedagogy that we've employed for one of those exact reasons. And it is an engineering approach, so students can't just rush through and find the answer. There's a methodology so that they know when they're getting the right answers and they don't just move on. Connected to our curriculum now, though, a lot of programs, a lot of schools, for kids who show particular aptitude in a subject, they tend to move them on into to the next grade subject area. And in mathematics and in most subject areas, the next grade isn't always more technically difficult or conceptually challenging. It's often just an extension, or it may be completely disconnected to what is being done in the previous grade. So moving students into the next grade level individually is not our preference. We prefer to find lots of challenge within grade level, because in most subject areas, you can challenge students in the concepts they're currently learning for weeks. And that development of mastery is more important than seeing how quickly we can get through this set of questions and then move on to the next set of questions so we can say we're finished. Mathematics, science, any subject area is not a race. It's about developing the skills, the knowledge, and the mastery of the subject that is really important. And the more challenge students want, the more we will be able to provide. Last week, we heard from teachers who talked about differentiation in the classroom. How do we challenge students that need it? How do we support students who might need that till they catch up and are ready to move ahead? And all of our teachers are masterful at that and dedicated to differentiation. But again, this comes back to our focus on thinking. If you look at our very intentional curriculum, it is focused around the processes of thinking. It's not focused around the processes of getting to an answer. We use the Socratic method with our with our teachers, I should say, in the younger part of the school, because we know that the process of asking questions like, why do you feel that way? How did you come to that determination? What informs that opinion that you have? What biases might you be bringing to that opinion? Those are all really important metacognitive skills that students develop if we help them develop them. And it's the same when we're teaching in the classroom and we ask a question of a student. You know, we ask a class a question and we look for that 1 second response. That's not what we're doing in our classes. We ask questions, we let students ponder them, we let students think about them, formulate their own answers, work with other students, decide if their answer needs more reframing, needs more data, needs more evidence. They discuss, they dialogue, they debate, and then they present their individual or their group answers. And that's all part of the process. But learning individual bits of knowledge and then spitting them out quickly is not the sort of style of teaching that we use in a school like ours, nor do any of our teachers buy into that system. We're about developing young thinkers. So I'm going to let John and Isabella chime in on that because I went on too long.
Well, and I think the piece that I would love for them to get to would be the question about when the answer is wrong, and what tools do you use to help kids work through that?
I'm going to jump in first, if I may, Isabella, because I wanted to go on with Keith's. I mean, one of the things about programming is we're always wrong in that. A program hardly ever works right the first time. And so it's one of the fundamental things of programming is debugging, looking through the code and understanding how it works and what's the process that it runs and where's the error. So it's all about debugging. I mean, this is all about dealing with errors. It's just part of programming for us.
Yeah, I think everything that I want to say has kind of been covered, but something I do in my classroom is I create classroom norms, and one of the classroom norms is normally we should be wrong sometimes, and especially in science, because that again goes with this whole notion of asking questions. So asking those questions to figure out why could that be wrong, and what did that teach us, and how are we going to use that to move towards the right answer. So no judgment, no getting mad at someone for giving the wrong answer. It's okay to be wrong sometimes, and in science we're often wrong, like in programming a lot of the time, but that leads us to our discoveries.
Terrific, thank you. And I have a question for John. Let me just scroll to find it. John, what is the program for the 7th graders in coding and programming?
The programming language? Well, we're going to be looking at a couple of different things. One of the things we're going to be using is Swift Playgrounds for developing apps for the Mac. There's also an alternative one that I've used as well too, that's called LiveCode. That's multi-platform for Android as well as for iOS. But the main coding language that we intend to be using is Python. It's an easy language to get into, very similar to English, but extremely powerful as well too.
Terrific. And I have another one for you, John, also from a student. An enrolled student who's living in California right now, so moving here this summer. And he wants to know, are we going to code any games?
No, games are fun. We don't want to do anything fun. It's a school. Of course, we're going to code some games. That's part of the fun of coding, is doing something that's fun and enjoyable to do.
Thank you. And question for Isabella. So Isabella, welcome. Parent writes, what would a standard science class look like for a grade 4 student? And how will you bring to life the same experiences that you had as a child? And can we get the camera on Isabella, please?
Yeah, this is for you.
All right. I guess it's on me. Okay, so I think a standard science class will look different, kind of most days. But I guess the general theme would be that the beginning of class is usually spent either reviewing maybe what was covered in the last class, if that's going to help us kind of ease into the day's class, or maybe it's an introduction, maybe it's a demonstration that gets students really excited and thinking about what's going to happen or what we're going to learn about in that class. Time permitting, if we have maybe longer class periods, I'm not sure exactly what the schedule is going to look like, but I usually use those longer class periods to do a larger, maybe longer, more comprehensive activity or lab, or if we can get outside, if we're studying geology, for example, maybe go for a walk and examining the different rocks we see, or landforms or things like that. So there will always be, as much as possible, maybe not every single class, I don't know if I can make that promise, but most classes, a hands-on component. And then what will I think the second part was, what will I do to bring my experiences as a child to life in class? I think that, well, part of it will just be my excitement for science and my excitement for all of the different topics we're going to cover. I was just going through the curriculum the other day, and I am so excited about what I get to teach next year. I find everything so fun, and I'm excited to bring, I think that passion and that excitement will come off to the students, I hope. And I hope that they'll start to feel that and want to ask more questions and learn more. And I like to bring my own experiences as a child into class, so I'll find ways to do that whenever I can. And then again, I think, like, for me, the biggest thing was the exploration part of science that I got as a child. So really finding ways to bring that into the classroom as much as possible. I think that's the best way to get my students excited and really wanting to learn more and really engage in science.
Thank you, Isabella. And we have a question for John. And this question is being posed by a former developer, so you're on notice here. How do you help students deal with the frustration of a program/robot not working as intended and having to have the tenacity of going back to find the quote-unquote why?
Okay, well, first, before I actually answer the question, let me go back to something Keith said earlier, and is if we've got a former developer here, please, I'm always looking forward to people coming in to help, offer guest lectures, practical lessons, give your experiences in class. I am not a professional developer. I'm a professional educator. I've done development, I've done programming, but I would love to have experts like yourself come in and help out in the school as well, too. But as I said earlier, in answering the other question, the whole part of programming and developing and building robots and things is attempting to accomplish a goal, breaking it down into parts, thinking logically through how you're going to solve the problem, get the machine or the computer to do what you want to do, and inevitably, there's going to be problems along the way. We start with simple things and we add on to it. We go through an iterative process and say, what's the smallest thing we can build that will function, and get that to work, and then add something more to it and add something more. We're all in this together. To deal with that frustration and to develop the tenacity, we simply have to show the students that we all make mistakes. We all have things that don't work well. We all have things that crash or fail to run the way we intend. And we have to keep going because we can be successful. So we share in our successes, we all commiserate and help each other with the problems and move on forward.
Amy?
Yes?
If I could just, I just wanted to say something about one of the previous questions, because John and Isabella are not, well, John is in Portugal, Isabella is not. We haven't had a chance in both of their cases to really debrief the timetable. So Isabella had input into that, which we're still working the timetable details out, including for our new grade 7. However, with that said, we have built in double blocks for science so that students have a chance to really immerse themselves in the environment, get their hands dirty, have both theory and experimental in class. So that was a design feature that we built into our timetable for students. Not every class, but many of the classes are double blocks. I want to also go back to a question that a parent asked earlier. It was about making mistakes and recognizing that there isn't always one answer. Usually there isn't always one answer. And that, I think, talks about building resilience in young people. I think that was the root of that question, building resilience and a growth mindset in young people. And parents who've met with me have heard me talk many times about the importance of building confidence. But confidence isn't built by having someone tell you you're good at something. Confidence is built by doing things, often by failing at them and then trying again, and realizing that we are all capable of doing much more than we first perceive. That's part of the reason we selected the violin program, for example. It's a difficult instrument. We could have picked a very easy instrument, the recorder, but we didn't. We picked the violin for a specific purpose. People will learn this instrument, young people, and they will then say to themselves, I can play the violin when I'm 6 years old. What can't I do? And so that's an important, I think, thing to recognize, that all of our teachers recognize, and also the research on this is very clear. If you tell young people they're talented frequently enough, or that they're smart, they will do everything to make you think they are talented or smart, which means they will avoid things that make them look less talented or less smart. They will have not a growth mindset, but a protective mindset that they must protect their egos. Instead, what we want to do with young people is praise their effort, how hard they work at something, how they overcame obstacles to achieve something, how they worked against odds, not had the odds in their favor. And so as parents and educators, all of us need to remember, avoid telling your children they're smart and talented. Instead, praise the things they do well by putting forward the effort, because we know people over the course of their life are much more successful from their efforts than from their innate raw talent.
Thank you for that, Keith. We have a question. It's probably for John and Keith, really. Do you plan to participate in robotics and science competitions and events?
I'll let you have this one, John.
Okay. Definitely. Keith was saying, we were talking about this, and I saw that some of the other TASIS schools are in the Lego First Robotics League, and looking forward to developing our team there. In my previous school in Ethiopia, we had a robotics team that we worked in, talking about resilience and effort. You know, we participated internationally against other international schools, and the first year we did well. We got second place in the robotics competition. The next year, the students were determined to do better, and we came in, I think, third. And so they were all disappointed. So we fought hard, and the next year we took the gold medal. So I'm hoping to get another gold medal to add to that list for TASIS here.
And John, I think when you told me that story the first time, I think you included that you made all of your students go without lunch for 2 weeks until they could get that gold medal. Isn't that the truth?
If you don't succeed, you don't eat.
Learn to pay the price, right?
It's, you know, hunger is a good motivator, I think.
Okay, you two, I better stop this before it goes any further.
I'm kidding.
We have a question, and this is going to reveal my ignorance on this topic. And so a parent is asking about CAD modeling from an early age. Do you say CAD or do you say CAD?
I say CAD.
Okay, a parent is asking about CAD modeling from an early age. Recommended or no way?
Because I would recommend that you do it at an appropriate level. There are tools that are simple on tablets and things that are designed for kids. That kind of modeling of materials, shapes, etc., can be grasped by younger kids. I think that challenge there can help develop that tenacity that Keith was talking about. Why not? If it's appropriate. You don't want to start with something that's, you know, going to be so complex that a kid's just going to get frustrated and give up. Something that's aimed at their level is appropriate. That's what we do with programming. We don't start with Python. We start with Scratch or Scratch Junior and develop competence in that thinking, and then go up to a text-based tool like Python.
Amy, I'll just add that you know, John's focus is on robotics and coding at the youngest ages. Something like CAD, computer-assisted design, we expect in our middle school as part of our design program to have that. It's more closely connected probably to the arts than coding is. Coding is more connected to math and logic, but not that they're not interconnected. However, I see a design program in the middle school where we have an opportunity for young people to use CAD or computer-assisted design.
Thank you, Keith, for adding that. And I think it's, you know, fair to say that John would welcome any parent who wants to discuss that with him and is curious about what's age appropriate for their young child. And, you know, every child's different. So what John might recommend for one child might be different than for another. But any child who has an appetite for that sort of thing, I mean, that's certainly what TASIS would like to embrace.
Sure. And if I could add, my response and the way I was thinking about the question was from a kind of a parents and a family point of view, because certainly the learning happens outside of school a lot. Within the school, you know, we're going to follow a curriculum, and we've got a coding curriculum that's going to be very closely integrated with mathematics, and we're going to do tasks that fit in with that. Within the science, there'll be engineering tasks that fit in with the science curriculum. Certainly, we're also already starting to talk about extracurricular activities, after-school clubs, and that sort of design thing for younger students might be part of that. And certainly, as Keith said, you know, we'll develop more of the design and the engineering as we get older.
Thank you for that. And I'm busily scrolling through the questions. So this question is for Isabella, and they begin, don't get us wrong, because All you've said is just perfect in capital letters. But from another angle, do you also value students, quote unquote, scribbling on notepads to help structure their thoughts and hypothesize before experimenting hands-on?
Yes, absolutely. Like Keith was saying earlier, I think that the value of hands-on practical experiments, activities, etc., doesn't really come unless you have the foundation, so the knowledge base, the initial hypothesizing, figuring out what are we learning, what's going on, why this, why that. And then as a supplement to that, as like a really grounding and maybe to extend the learning, you do the hands-on activity or the practical part of science to really make those connections stronger. But if you don't know what's going on or you haven't guessed at what's going on before you do those hands-on things, then I think students will just be even more lost. So yeah, it's definitely important to have that foundation, that grounding, in order to really benefit from the hands-on activities and experiments.
And Amy, Isabella's articulated really our curricular philosophy in the elementary program, which is we all believe in inquiry, and inquiry is a fantastic way to learn, but it is also can be a highly inefficient way to learn if it's not guided and if it's not followed with with a qualified, talented teacher who can make sure that students aren't spinning their wheels for days, but instead looking in the right places to find source material or having a body of knowledge from which to do their inquiry. And so that's finding that balance. And we're not a pure inquiry school, because we happen to believe there is a body of knowledge that's worth knowing and learning, and that is important to the learning process. And I often quote one of the most famous scientists ever, Sir Isaac Newton, who talked about standing on the shoulders of giants. Everything he knew, he learned from people who had done similar experiments, similar theoretical calculations in the past, and then he used that as a springboard to develop, some of the most critical physical laws that we use today.
Could I add something as well too? Because I think it's true for programming as well too, that not only do we do practical projects, but you also have to have a theoretical understanding of loops and branching and conditionals and these sorts of things. So, we have to have that kind of a balance as well too. I also wanted to add on, because the comment about scribbling made me think of something else that I think is an important point that I always like to make as well too, that we use the tools and the techniques and the approaches as they are appropriate. And sometimes it's appropriate to have a real active hands-on, let's build this. Sometimes it's appropriate to have a more theoretical, let's understand this process. Sometimes it's very important to put the computers and the robots away and pick up a book or a notebook and a scribble and a piece of paper to sketch things. Technology is not always the thing that should be in front of our faces, as those of us who are doing virtual learning every day now can agree. It's not always the right tool. We should use it when it's appropriate.
You know what, John? You said something really important. If you need help with conditional statements, my wife is fantastic at conditional statements, such as you always leave the toilet seat up. You never think about yourself. Very conditional. She can help you with that.
All right, can our producer mute the headmaster, please? And speaking of which, our producer tonight is our Director of Studies, Andrea Belaz, who has many talents, including all things technology. So we're grateful for her help this evening. We have a practical question, Keith, from a father, and I think it's a good opportunity because the timetables aren't yet up. They're shortly going up on our website. This is a father who would like to know when the school day for a seventh grader, for example, would start and end.
Monday through Thursday, we have an extended school day because we have so much that we're packing into our unique programming. The school day will start at 8:30, so students will have a homeroom every morning with their advisor homeroom teacher at 8:20. And then classes will begin thereafter at 8:30. Our blocks are 40-minute blocks. We have 10 blocks in a day. Students finish at 4:30. And then we have our after-school program.
Thank you very much for that answer. And we are working on getting those timetables finalized so we can publish them on the website for everyone to see. I just wanted to read, we have a couple of comments from parents of enrolled students, and then we will conclude the webinar. But one mother of 2 girls who are joining us this year said, as a parent of girls, I am so excited to have John and Isabella at TASIS. They both spoke of the importance of getting girls excited about science and robotics and helping them feel at home in the world of science. Awesome.
And maybe we have a parent who is herself a scientist and has offered to have an after-school program for us in rocketry. So we're really excited about that one.
Yay. So cool.
That is very exciting, and I will conclude with the second parent comment. Really excellent and passionate science and coding teachers. I think TASIS has recruited really excellent educators, so kudos to you, Keith, and I'm very excited for my son. I know he will be in good hands, and of course that's the purpose of us hosting these webinars on Thursday evenings, because you weren't able to visit a school and look into classrooms and see the smiling faces of people like John and Isabella and know that they're connecting with your children. So we are trying to help you see that right now. And since nobody can physically visit schools at the moment anyway, this forum is the way we're doing it. So thank you, all of you, for attending. We have concluded our questions and comments, because otherwise it would be more flattery of the group. And Keith and Isabella and John, I think you've had all you can take tonight of the flattery.
No,
so
bring it on.
Thank you all so much for attending. And Isabella and John, thank you for your time. I know you're both extremely busy right now with your school and teaching.
Amy?
Yes, Keith?
I'm just wondering if you want to talk about next week's guests?
Next week's guest? Well, I was going to let you do that, actually, and to sign off and thank everyone.
Okay, great. I did want to comment before I introduce next week's guest. We recognize that our facility will be in development for the next number of years, because we have an enormous platform from which to develop our elementary, middle, and senior school programs, and we're going to take full advantage of this beautiful site. However, we're asking families to trust that we're going to put on the best academic program, and the best academic program is always put on by the best teachers. And so if you can trust one thing, you can trust that I've hired the best people out there. These are examples of the sorts of people that we've hired tonight: John and Isabella, last week Heather and Aaron. You're going to meet many other teachers. As I've talked about, we have many excellent teachers who are coming from local schools that we can't yet introduce because their schools don't want them to be introduced yet, and we respect that. But we have phenomenal teachers, and I keep saying that because good schools are built on great teachers, not on great facilities. We'll have those as well. I did want to introduce next week's. Next week we have our Director of Modern Languages and our Portuguese teacher, Sergio Franslin, who will be joining us. And Sergio will talk about the Portuguese program, and as well some parents had questions about preparing students for Portuguese universities, and Sergio has done that for many, many years, and he's going to talk about those things. So prepare your questions. And joining Sergio is Bill Brooks, who's joining us from the United States, and Bill is our English language and literature specialist, teaching in grades 4 through 7. So we'll look forward to having both of them. They've actually been in contact quite a bit, because Bill's been asking Sergio to help him with his Portuguese and Portuguese history, and so I know that they've already collaborated a bit on this. So anyway, thank you, everybody. We're a little bit over time, I recognize. We really appreciate the opportunity to tell you what we're planning for your children and your families. We hope this is informative. We recognize that because of current circumstances, you can't come in. So this is us reaching out to you and trying in our very best way to be fully transparent and honest about what our intentions are and how we plan to do things with you and with your children. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.